Good morning. I'm Tim Bardick, and I'm here, or well, kind of here, virtually here, in my role as a member of the Sunday Services Committee. And I'd like to welcome all of you to this People's Church Zoom service. Special welcome to anyone visiting this Zoom service. And we hope it helps support you in living a life full of meaning and commitment. People's Church is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association. We're part of a long tradition of liberal religion. Among other things, liberal religion means that we believe we are called to do what we can as individuals and as part of a larger community to build a more just world. To quote a poem from the 19th century Unitarian minister, Edward Everett Hale, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And just because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." Let us be committed to what we can do, knowing that only from such small beginnings can we bend the arc of history towards justice. Our speakers today are Mary Spradling and Laura McClellan. Here are brief bios. Mary Spradling first attended People's Church on the corner of Rose and Lovell Street as a tiny baby when her mother brought her there in a basket. She lay on the table in her basket while her mother taught a Sunday school class to 6-year-olds called Our New Baby. She has been coming most of the time since then, with some years off while she attended college away from Kalamazoo. Mary has worked in libraries as a wallpaper hanger, and then returned to school in her 50s to earn a master's degree in counseling psychology. She enjoys reading, working in the garden, and she draws her inspiration from the natural world. She enjoys studying birds. Laura McClellan is a third-generation member of People's Church. She was raised in a UU family and grew up listening to Sally Rogers and other social justice-themed music. After some time away, she returned to People's Church in 2017 and officially became a member. She is currently in an online Master of Library and Information Sciences program. We will hear from Laura Mary a bit later, but first let me turn things over to Savannah for our opening song. We're now going to do our chalice lighting. And if you wish, after you light your chalice, you can enter into the chat. A chalice is lit in whatever neighborhood and community you identify with. And we're trying to figure out how to do the camera here. Not working. Okay, there it goes. Chalice lighting words come from Martha Kirby Capo. Through the week this chalice abides, cupped and silent. Softly it gleams in a dimly lit room, complete unto itself. Today we come together as a community of faith, joyful and free. Our individual energies combine to spark the flame of truth. May we each draw strength for the other. And like the chalice, may we be bathed in the fire of commitment to social justice, equity, and peace. Okay, one of the other things that we do during our services is we have time for our offering. The People's Church depends on many things. It depends on its members to volunteer for committees, to work on various things. And of course, it also depends on the financial resources of its members and friends. So in the chat box momentarily, there will appear a link to where you can contribute to People's Church. And I invite you to give as you are able and willing. So we will now have the offering accompanied by some music.
Hi, Sally Rogers here. I'm here today on behalf of the United Way of Massachusetts and their Family Support Fund. And I have a song for you here. This is one that I wrote. It's called What Can One Little Person Do? What can one little person do? What can one little me or you do? What can one little person do to help this world go round? One can help another one, and together we can get the job done. What can one little person do to help this world? Harriet Tubman was alone on the darkened road to freedom, but she couldn't leave her people far behind. Moses stretched out her hand, she led them to the promised land, 'cause she knew that she had justice on her side. Your turn. What can one little person do? What can one little me or you do? What can one little person do to help this world go round? One can help another one, and together we can get the job done. What can one little person do to help this world? When Sojourner Truth was free, she got down on her knees. She prayed to God to help her on her way. With her voice and with her might, she fought for what was right, 'cause she knew that she had justice on her side. Oh, what can one little person do? What can one little me or you do? What can one little person do to help this world go round? One can help another one, and together we can get the job done. Oh, what can one little person do to help this world? Rosa Parks sat on the bus, and the driver said, "You must move to the back of the bus or else be thrown in jail." Rosa stayed and stood her ground. She brought that old law down, 'cause she knew that she had justice on her side. Oh, what can one little person do? What can one little me or you do? What can one little person do to help this world go round? One can help another one, have a dream. He led this country's fight for human rights. We must fight for liberty till all of us are free, and we'll know that we have justice on our side. Last time, what can one little person do? What can one little me or you do? What can one little person do to help this world go around? One can help another one, and together we can get the job done. What can one little person do to help this world? One can help another one, and together we can get the job done. What can one little person do to help this world? Thank you very much. Thanks to the United Way of Massachusetts and their Family Support Fund.
Okay, I'd like to invite people to join me in reading the Giving Thanks for all that sustains us. From the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance, we bring these small portions to share in the works of love which none of us can accomplish alone. Turn it back to Savannah for the Fire of Commitment song.
You nod and tell me if that's bigger. Is that screen bigger than last time? No? Okay.
From the light of days remembered burns the beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
In Real Time by Jeannie Shiro. Black lives matter. Let the only burning be the fire of commitment in our hearts, minds, hands, spirits, in our community of faith. Live solidarity. Use your voice. Demand justice. Better, live it into being. Cry out for others to join you. Name hate as hate without shrinking back, without letting embarrassment or false humility or resistance or apologies for white skin get in the way. Direct all that energy to action, standing with, speaking out. Be impassioned. Imagine the cry for response if our predominantly white church burned and people said, well, that's too bad. Reminds me of another time. I heard that said from a human mouth. But that would not happen. Ours is not a black church. For us, the press would cover the story and swarm over it for days on end. Why is it different for our sister churches, black churches? About that, be indignant. About the violent ending of so many black lives. Precious, precious, precious lives. Say it for every life that has been taken. You'd never stop speaking. Be outraged. About the burning of houses of worship, sanctuaries of the spirit, sacred communal spaces. Be awakened. Racism is alive. It will never die of old age, ancient though it is. Rather, it must be buried by human awakening to equality incarnate. Participate in the movement. Call out those perpetuating violence against Black people and Black communities. Demand action from those in power, the press, government, and everywhere this story is not being told. Live differently. How? Find out together. Struggle to awaken. Stay woke. There is no safe place from which to simply observe. All are already involved. Listen more often than speaking. Speak more often than being silent. When your words or actions could change the world, even just a bit, in the flesh, in real time.
Jacob ten Hove uses song titles in each section of our hymnal, Singing the Journey, to create haiku-like poems that honor the inclusive breadth and creativity of our living tradition and the collection of songs. This poem comes from Words and Deeds of Prophetic People, a section of our hymnal. Standing on the side of love, I know I can open the window. Love knocks and waits for us to hear the fire of commitment. Come and go with me, building bridges when the Spirit says, lean on me.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Laura McClellan, and this is Mary Spradling. I was raised in People's Church, the third generation in my family, and the second to be brought to church little more than a month after my birth. I have always been a UU. For as long as I can remember, my family has been actively trying to make the world a better place in one way or another. When I was very young, my favorite music was by Sally Rogers, and my favorite cassette tape, What Can One Little Person Do? As an early elementary school student, I was already thinking about what I could do as one little person to help this world. The first opportunity I remember came shortly after September 11th, when my mother and I joined members of the community in downtown Kalamazoo to protest the beginning of the Iraq War. I remember as a teenager feeling the passion, feeling my heart beat as I stood there with other people who believed what I did and told the world, or at least the people who drove by, that something was wrong and I wanted to change it. I was committed. I was no longer one little person. I was part of a group of passionate people, people with the fire of commitment burning inside them, and we were going to change the world. Well, we tried. But I was not discouraged. Over the years, with my mother by my side, I protested against unjust wars and unjust treatment of people. We marched for gun control after yet another unacceptable school shooting. We attended the Women's March on Lansing in January of 2017. Bundled up in warm clothing, we marched in the crowds of pink and signs and made our presence and our voices known. I feel so alive at protests, amidst a crowd of hungry, passionate people who are standing up for what they believe. And I haven't been alone.
I have done my share of protesting too, beginning as a child when my parents took me to a demonstration on the steps of Kalamazoo's City Hall in the early 1960s. Even as a little kid, I knew we were doing something special. It was in support of the civil rights marches taking place then in the South, prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I did some protesting again in the early 70s to try to end the Vietnam War, and then on to other protests. But my life and my focus changed in 1999 when one of my children was diagnosed with a serious mental illness. The illness of a child changes everything in a family. For us, it changed how we related to each other and how we related to friends. It changed who we saw socially and how it worked out. And it changed how we related to the strangers in society who observed something, felt it was necessary to tell us how they would handle it, even though they knew little or nothing about what was happening. It also changed our expectations for that child's future. There were often expectations I didn't know I had until they were not met. Many of us have an inner roadmap of how life will progress, invisible until life doesn't go that way. We imagine that kids grow, they go to school, they graduate, they go to college or start a job, they date and find a mate, and then they have kids. But what happens when they can't go to school, when they never graduate even from middle school, let alone anything beyond that? During some very difficult years, when our family was wandering around in the wilderness of unmet expectations, struggling with how to move forward or wondering which way forward was, we were helped by a number of professionals who cared for us. They provided medical care, they provided coping skills, or hope, or sometimes just reassurance that we weren't alone. A nonprofit organization helped us with making schoolwork better for someone who didn't fit the mold or wasn't always able to learn. They provided a place to meet other parents who were lost in a similar wilderness and could laugh uneasily about the terrible things that happened in their homes, things that no one else would understand. I accepted a lot of help from that group, and then one day I was asked to help someone else. And fearfully, I went to a school meeting to support another parent who was a few years behind me in the process. I took a class at Community Mental Health. I went to conferences, and then I began to teach that class along with other older parents who had learned years ahead of me. In the year 2000, health insurance companies were not required to treat mental illnesses the same way as other physical ailments. They called problems with the brain, such as stroke and cerebral palsy, physical illnesses, and they paid claims for them. The illnesses of the mind, they said, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, apparently were choices that people were making, and as such, could only be covered at, say 50% of the physical rate, or they had a lifetime cap on benefits that could be met after $50,000 had been spent, or not covered at all. Imagine companies putting a cap on treatment for heart disease or cancer, or only covering it until a certain amount of money had been spent. Now I was no longer just protesting. I was able to testify in front of a subcommittee of the Michigan House of Representatives, and I talked with the Michigan Director of Health and Human Services. And along with a whole lot of other advocates, I helped change those laws. My passion, my fire of commitment, it turns out, was paying forward some of the care and the support I received from people, both professional and otherwise. I returned to school, I got a new degree, and I began a new life career at an age when many are thinking about retirement. I have spent my days for the past 10 years as a psychologist slash therapist slash counselor slash listening ear to others whose lives are going off the rails, or people who have never been able to find a satisfying path through life in the first place. What I could not do alone, neither can they, and now I am the one trying to shine the flashlight of hope, guidance, and assistance in the wilderness that I felt lost in not so very long ago. What we cannot do alone, we often can tolerate and begin to achieve together, whether it is a support group or individual therapy or some other connection with people that helps us on the path of life. The isolation of this pandemic, too, is made easier by connections, whether they are family members, neighbors, relatives, or strangers with whom we find connections. Since the pandemic began and we were locked down for a time, Laura and I have taken 2 walks each day. We are creatures of habit, and we often take the same streets. We turn at the same corners, and in the spring, we begin to see the same people day after day as they emerge to work on their homes and their gardens and walk their dogs and just enjoy the sunshine. We realized recently that we have a dozen new friends or more. To name a few, there is the woman who left us a huge bag of irises to plant, the man on the corner who has a new chicken coop that looks like a tiny red barn, the young couple pushing their not yet walking baby in a stroller, and the lady with all the humorous animals made of scrap metal in her yard. There's a man who has sunflowers taller than the roof of his house, and the couple who is bit by bit cleaning up the immense tree that fell and crushed their garage, clearing out the junk and preparing to build anew. And there is the family of Friendly Dog, who now we number among those we greet regularly, from an appropriate distance, of course. We don't know any of their names, but the connections make the walks nicer, richer, more enjoyable, and they remind us that all those people and more are going through the pandemic with us, and they care enough to smile and say hello every day.
Since the pandemic has largely taken control of our lives, I have had to settle for making little connections with the people we pass on the street or friendly greetings. I have attended church every Sunday, and I have watched as wrongdoings happen in my world and as other people have potentially risked their lives to be present and make their voices heard the way I used to, the way I wish I still could. But as I live with someone in a high-risk population for COVID-19, I have stayed home, and I have wished for something meaningful to do when I cannot put myself bodily out there. So I ask, from all of you who also burn with the fire of commitment, how have you made a difference? And more importantly, how have you still? And now back to Tim for our discussion.
Thank you, Mary and Laura. So we're going to break into 5 smaller groups. And let me just read the questions for sharing and discussion in the group. And then I'll explain a little bit. We're going to do this a little bit differently. We're trying out something a little different this week from what we've done before. So here are the questions for your small group discussion. Number 1, how has your fire of commitment driven you to make a difference in your community or in the world? And 2, how have you continued to make that difference even with the recent pandemic? What ideas can you share? Okay, and it's that last point, it's going to be a little bit different. What we're asking you to do is in your small group, which will be discussing these 2 questions for 10 minutes. At the end of that, we want you to share one idea with the entire church. And that means you need to designate one person in your group to share that idea. What that person will have to do is at the end of that, and I'll explain this again when we come out of the groups, is in the participant window, which hopefully you found at the bottom of your screen, you click on it and it pops up on the right. At the bottom of the participant window, there should be something that says next to the yes button, raise hand. And so you will raise your hand at the end of this, and I will call on you. And then Tim Spradling, who's running the AV today, will unmute you and spotlight you, and people can see you and hear you. And so we'll have 5 ideas from each of the 5 groups. And again, these will need to be brief, you know, a minute or two. So any event, so Tim will now break us into 5 groups, discuss those 2 questions, come up with 1 idea to share, and 1 person who will be the designated sharer. So we'll now break into the 5 groups. Okay, we're now going to have an idea being shared from each group, and then hopefully each group has an idea to share and 1 person who will share it. To do that, and hopefully this works for everyone, there's a participant window which you access by clicking at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. I don't know what you do if you're on a phone, but if you're on a computer, it's at the bottom of the screen. And then on the right there in your participant window, at the bottom of the participant window, next to the yes, there should be something saying raise hand. So what should happen now is the 5 people who are the designated sharers should raise their hand, and I will call on them. And then Tim Spradling, who's running the AV, will unmute you and spotlight you. So raise your hand if you're one of the people who is sharing, and hopefully I can find the hands here. Okay. Gay Walker raised her hand, so Gay Walker will start out. Whoops, you haven't been unmuted yet.
Unmute. I was asked to share this in my group, and it's a small thing, but as you know, David Curl died a month ago, and he asked me to take care of his life's work of all these photos, and so I've got them in my garage, and I'm going through the process of finding places for them. And the money goes towards the church. So it's my commitment to honor David in this way. And it's a joy, but it's also a pretty big responsibility. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. Next up is Reverend Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. One of the not terrible things about the pandemic is that the meetings that our local elected officials are having, so city commission and county commission, at least in Kalamazoo, and I imagine elsewhere, are happening virtually. So you can both watch and leave comments from the comfort of your own home. So the city commission met a couple days ago, and 83 people in our community had comments, and they were listening to them until 1:30 in the morning. So if you have things to say about how Kalamazoo City, Kalamazoo County, or the other elected leaders locally are doing their jobs, it's easier than it's ever been to let them know during their public meetings and to watch what they say in response. So participate.
Thanks, Rachel. And then Connie and Steve Ferguson are next.
We had trouble settling on one thing in our group, but there were a couple of themes. One was trying to find the ways to keep what we've always done going, and perhaps in new ways. but a couple of specifics too were because maybe some of our expenses in our households are lower right now in certain areas, taking that opportunity to increase our support of local organizations that are doing things to help people directly in our community. There were a couple of us who were trying to do that. And then one person who went out to a demonstration and told some people he didn't really appreciate what they were doing and didn't think it was appropriate. So that took some physical courage. We have a variety, but like I said, we couldn't really pinpoint one, or maybe we just couldn't find someone who was willing to talk. And they said, Connie, you talk. So here I am.
Thanks, Connie. Next up are Emily Betancourt and Tom Hackley.
So I'm the designated spokesperson, but I'm speaking about Emily's initiative. She and our daughter-in-law, Laurel, were talking about the Black Lives Matter and how we can combat racism. And they decided to start up a family book group. So we have 10, 11 family members here in Kalamazoo right now, and they chose the book White Fragility. And so not everybody in the family is participating at this point because they've got other stuff going on, but we're going to begin our in-person, in the parking lots, socially distanced conversations about our own racism next week. So it may not change the world, but we hope it'll change us.
Thank you, Tom. I don't see any other hands raised, so I don't know if that's it. I assume that that is it. And we'll now move to our closing song, followed by closing words.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason. Reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
Our closing words come from the French classicist Pierre Hadot. he ends one of his books with this following quote from the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. "Do not wait for Plato's Republic, but be happy if one little thing leads to progress. And reflect on the fact that what results from such a little thing is not, in fact, so very little. Go in peace and go in hope for the future." And now, if for those who wish, we're going to have our virtual coffee. Well, it's not an hour; it's 15 minutes. 15 minutes of fame or sharing, and the AV will break each people into random groups for that. And thank you all for attending, and thanks to Mary and Laura for a wonderful service. I think it was great. So thank you. Stay safe.